Don't know me, my name is Chris Piasecki. I am from the city of Edmonton in Canada.
Yeah.
Any other fellow Canadians in the room? Awesome. Okay, I see a few. Excellent. So I am an independent consultant as of 3 months ago, actually. I spent about the last 8 years working for a large partner firm, or consulting company, and so just 3 months ago I decided to kind of go on my own and go independent. I do a lot of work with the Power Platform and Dynamics 365 CRM. So I've got about 11 or so years in the industry, a lot of experience in consulting, working with custom development, .NET, and I kind of made my way into the Dynamics CRM as it was about 8 or so years ago, just falling in love with what the XRM sort of platform, as they called it back then, where you had the ability to just rapidly develop enterprise applications in a low-code manner, and just the journey that has kind of come all these years. It's just quite amazing to see what we can do today, and just how more people are leveraging it to build amazing applications. So that's kind of also inspired me to kind of talk about the XRM Toolbox, as more and more people are starting to get familiar with Dataverse. It's kind of crucially important that they have a better idea of all the tools available to them to help them be more productive in what they do. I'm also a Microsoft MVP in business applications. I like to spend a lot of time in the community. I'm a super user in the Power Apps community forum, so you'll certainly see me posting in the Dataverse section. And I also run a local user group, so the Edmonton Power Platform user group. So I like to keep busy. So I've got my social handles there. If you'd like to connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter, just feel free to drop me a message. Let me know you saw my session at the Power Platform, just so I know where you're coming from. And so with that, let's get into it. So the XRM Toolbox is just an amazing community-built tool, and it saves and has saved countless hours for all sorts of different people that are working with the platform. So not just developers, but business analysts, functional consultants, admins, power users, and so on. And just anyone working with Microsoft Dataverse, it saves you countless hours because of just the amazing things that it can do. And so, why does the XRM Toolbox kind of exist? Well, a big part of it really is, and this is not certainly a slight to Microsoft by any means, but it really comes to fill in gaps in the native product where perhaps there's certain features or capabilities that are not missing. A perfectly great example of this is the Ribbon Workbench, for example. For the longest time since the early CRM days, there's no native inbuilt feature to work with what was called the ribbon commands, or the ribbon buttons at the top, and now known as the modern commanding. Just recently, probably in the last couple of years, they introduced the modern commanding feature, which was kind of an evolution of the old sort of ribbon and command bar. And so for probably several years, 8, 9, 10 years, there was actually just no native capability to do that, and that's where the XRM Toolbox came in to kind of fill that gap. So the XRM Toolbox, it does all sorts of different kinds of tasks. So it allows you to help with configuration, customization, managing like security, administrative tasks, and even documentation, as you'll see. So just kind of the impact that the XRM Toolbox has had. As you can see, it's over 10 years it's been in developers and publishers today. I think there's over 430 or 450 tools in the toolbox as of today that are kind of verified or published and available for download. And I think it's got over like 500,000 downloads today. So just the impact and use and support by this community is just amazing. And it really is a tool for community by the community. And that's why I absolutely love this tool. Even Microsoft sees the impact of this tool, because you'll see references to the XRM Toolbox and many of its plugins referenced in official Microsoft documentation. I believe even some tools like the Ribbon Workbench were actually part of official Microsoft training content from Dynamics CRM back in the day. So it's, just kind of goes to show how much of a community tool can have an impact. And probably one of my favorite things about it is this tool is completely free, because again, as I said, it is built for the community, by the community, and the developer has promise that it will continue to be free as long as they are supporting it. So just an amazing tool. So what can we actually do with the XRM Toolbox? Well, I would say, what can't I do? I mean, probably can't do, make my coffee and stuff, but I mean, it's pretty darn close to the amazing things it can do. Probably the amount of time it saves me, I can actually go and run and get a coffee. So we can do awesome things with like configuration, so working with your metadata. So for example, we have like the attribute manager where you can basically define like your data model, your data dictionary in this nice little Excel template. And you can basically take and upload this template and mass create your tables and mass create your columns. Whereas, typically if you're using the Maker portal to go through this, it can get very tedious if you're having to create a table with like 30, 40, 50 columns. And so just the amount of time that it can save you just by using, one of these kind of templates. And this is kind of the thing that you would do normally through designing in a project anyways, right? You're doing your data modeling. So, I mean, why not put it into this nice little template, and once it's ready to go, you suck it in and bam, it's already done a lot of the configuration work for you. You save probably several minutes to several hours, depending on how large your data model is. And so there's, again, lots of other examples of great configuration, like the Easy Translator helps you to manage translations, right? Like if you've ever had to work with translations in data versus, this is very unwieldy, giant file that you have to kind of download and re-upload, and sometimes take up to a couple hours, depending on how large your customizations are. And so it allows you to kind of incrementally or bite-sized upload pieces of translations and manage that a lot easier. Things like managing solution layering, I guess, again, for those that work, have worked with solutions and have to manage that ALM aspect, how painful it can be just to look through the Solution Explorer, trying to compare and find where unmanaged changes made in the environment, why are configuration off. So there's an awesome tool to help do that. It has a lot of great tools for data management, and a couple of those I'm actually going to show you today. So like the Fetch XML builder, for example, helping you build Fetch XML queries as working with Fetch XML directly is a bit unwieldy and a bit intimidating for a non-developer, right? Or things like SQL for CDS for those that like to have a background in SQL and like to use that as their tool for querying data and doing little ad hoc data operations. There's also great tools for admin and security related, so being able to look at certain user settings in the environment and apply sort of common settings across all your users, because there's no user interface to do that normally, right? Being able to manage things like field security profiles or managing roles, being able to actually document that as well. So there's actually a lot of great documentation tools that a couple of them we'll get to show you today. For example, the metadata browser or ERD Visio builder. So actually taking your data model, generating a Visio file that you can use for documentation and keeping your operational documentation up to date as the system evolves. Because I don't know about you guys, I personally don't like maintaining documentation. It's kind of usually sort of always, I'm never at the forefront at least to find. So just any sort of tools that can help make my life easier is awesome. So yeah, so this is just a small slice of some of the plugins available, and a few of these I'm going to be happy to show you through or walk through today. And also, I'm going to get to show you some kind of hidden tips and tricks with the tool, and things that you may not necessarily be aware of. So just kind of curious to read through. So who here has either just getting started with the XRM Toolbox or never used it before? Okay, awesome. And how many sort of veterans or experts with the XRM Toolbox we got in here? Okay, awesome. We got a great mix. So that's awesome. So hopefully you got something for each and every one of you. Just getting to show you all the different tools that are available. And so, with that said, a lot of this is going to be sort of a live hands-on demo. I'm going to actually show you this rather than me talking forever on slides. So let's kind of jump into it. Yeah, it's a great question. The question was, is the XRM Toolbox something that you install like a local client on your machine, or is it installed in the cloud? So the XRM Toolbox is actually a Windows-based application that you install on your machine. And so to do that, in order to get the XRM Toolbox, so you can just go over to the xrmtoolbox.com, able to download the latest version. So as I mentioned, it is a Windows application, so if you are running on Mac or Linux, you're going to have to probably dual boot to Windows in order to use it, unfortunately, or use a VM. But if you're using Windows, then yeah, that's nice and easy. So I'm going to hop over and open my version or my copy of the toolbox. Oh, let's see, this should be. I don't know. All right, excellent, sorry about that. So the first thing you'll see when you launch the toolbox here is you'll see this kind of start page where you'll get to see right off the hop sort of your recently used tools on the side. So it's nice, quick, and easy access for tools that you're using regularly. It even shows like the connection, so the environment that you're connected to, so you can easily jump back into the tool that you're previously using, especially if you have tools that you're using regularly on the daily and so on. So getting quick access to that. You also have the ability to pin like your favorite tools, including the connection or the environment that you want to connect to. So again, a couple of ways to easily access your tools. Move over to your tools tab. So this is going to show you a list of all of your currently installed tools. By default, I think it's going to sort it by alphanumeric, but I'll show you kind of some of the different settings that you can configure in the toolbox to kind of set your preferences and make it easier to get to your tools. So I, for example, have mine sorted by most recently, or most used, I believe. So as you can kind of see in the top there, it kind of shows sort of how many launches it has as of recently. And then you have your tool library, and this is where you can actually go out and install various tools that are out there that are available. And the nice thing is, because it is kind of a community-built tool for the community, almost, I'd say the large majority of these tools are open source. So even if you're like a developer, for example, and want to have a better idea of what sort of this code is doing, or maybe perhaps as part of a a security review, as part of getting these tools approved to use in your enterprise, you may want to be able to actually go and see that this tool is not doing anything malicious. The source code is available for many of these tools for you to actually go and do that sort of security assessment or review as needed, right? So yeah, we have about, like I said, 400 different tools. You can go and kind of filter by a whole bunch of different categories. So things around solutions, security, reporting, documentation, so on and so forth. You can filter by whether it's like open source, or whether it's built by an MVP, or filter by maybe just want to see the top rated tools only perhaps, new tools and so on and so forth. So easy to actually get in. But also you have like an autocomplete, so I can start searching for, say, Fetch XML Builder, and I can easily find that tool. And you can see kind of a little check mark on it that this tool is kind of already installed. And so if you wanted to install any sort of plugin, you just basically need to select it and just do install. Oh, this I have this one already installed. But basically you can just select any sort of one you want to install, and it just quickly installs, very quick. The other thing is you don't actually have to physically install the XRM Toolbox. You just basically have to download and extract it, and then kind of pin it wherever you want. So it's a nice thing is too, like you don't necessarily need administrative access on your machine to install the tools and get going. Now, of course, some of the security people in the room might be like, oh, I don't really like that, but there is a couple of settings as well regarding to sort of security and administrative that I'll kind of go through at the end, so we can kind of lock down the use of the tool as sort of needed. So with that, let's actually jump over and show some of these plugins in action. So one of my favorite ones, and probably one of the most popular community tools, is the Fetch XML Builder. So let's kind of open up and see what that looks like. Now, usually if you're not connected to an environment, it's going to kind of prompt you to connect to your environment, and you'll enter sort of your credential information and access that. And I'll walk through a little bit what the connection manager and all that looks like a little bit later, so I can show you how you can easily organize all of your different connections and make that easier to work with. Yes, you have a note?
You have to be an administrator to your environment.
So the question was, do you have to be an administrator in your environment to connect to it? And the answer is no. You just need to have access to the environment, so basically have a Dataverse role assigned so that you can effectively log in. Yeah, great question. So here we have the Fetch XML Builder. So as I said, Fetch XML is a query language in Dataverse, so it's used to query your data. And so having to work with this directly can be pretty complex and intimidating for a non-developer. And so the Fetch XML Builder provides a nice little GUI interface for you to actually go in and build your query. So you have this nice little query builder on the side, for example, so you'll be able to select your table. So for example, we have our contact table. We can then go and kind of select, which sort of attributes that we want to show in our fetch query. So for example, I have like city and full name on the contact that I want to select. We can then go and kind of start to then add filtering and sorting capabilities. So for example, I added a filter here that, I want to get all contacts where are currently other addresses in the city of Seattle. So that's kind of nice and easy to do. And then at the kind of top level, I can also apply things like sorting as well if I wanted to, ordered by whatever, say by city or by full name, so on and so forth. And so you can actually see the fetch XML. So this is what the fetch XML definition will look like, and it kind of gets updated as you're adding sort of conditions, filter constraints, and so on. And then basically you can go and execute that, and this will start to go and make a call to Dataverse to retrieve information in the environment. I'm not coming up with any particular records in this case. What that is, I don't know. Let's just. I'm wondering if I have the resolution. No, I do not. Okay. Let me try building that again. If I were just to, let's just start over. So let's go with duplicate this tool into new. Working on the fly here. So add in my fetch XML, and we'll just try to run that again. Okay, so I'm getting some records here. So again, just a very simple query here. I'm just getting the full name of all my contacts and the city where they're all based in Seattle. Now, one nice little part about what I like about this tool is it has the ability to also convert the fetch XML or the result into also other sort of syntax that you can use in other areas. So I don't know about you guys, if you guys use the Dataverse connector for Power Automate and have to build queries. So the one kind of unwieldy part about the Dataverse connector in Power Automate is that if you want to do any sort of filtering, you have to start applying OData syntax, which is basically a developer querying language. Again, it's kind of scary for non-developers. And so you actually have the ability to just do this convert, and to Power Automate, it'll actually generate the columns filtering that you need, or generate the filter and the OData syntax as you see here. And you can just simply just click and copy to your clipboard and bring that over to your Power Automates and actually just paste that in, and then there you don't have to like figure out the unwieldy syntax there to get things right, which can be quite time consuming and a lot of troubleshooting in order to do that if you're not familiar with OData. So that's really an awesome kind of capability that it provides to make it easier for all types of makers.
Is there any SQL limitations as far as the features of SQL you can use with this against Dataverse?
Yeah, so the question is if there's sort of any limitations from the sort of SQL queries that can be performed against Dataverse with Fetch XML. So yeah, Fetch XML, the querying language in itself, does have certain constraints. So it can do sort of simple sort of join statements, but if you're having to do anything really, really complex, or joining multiple sort of tables, or doing many. Yeah, so Fetch XML is a querying language, so it's meant to just retrieve records. Oh, so running in T-SQL. So yeah, with T-SQL, which you can do via the TDS endpoint, that is also like sort of a read-only endpoint, so you can only do querying or read operations for sure. But yeah, great question.
I've got a question as well. So on you had mentioned that as long as you have Dataverse access, you're able to use this tool. So I'm thinking towards like if you have to enable somebody to be a system customizer to make a Power App, they would also have access to this. But in the admin center security roles, if you didn't toggle on all the CRUD operations for a specific Dataverse table, would they still be able to use this and read the data from stuff that they don't have access to in security roles?
Yeah, so great question. So the question was, can a user, if they have, only certain certain permissions against certain tables in Dataverse, can they use this tool to sort of bypass or escalate their privileges? And the answer is no. So again, you're authenticating with whatever credentials you provide. So if it's your own credentials, you're not going to get any more privileges that you normally would, right? So yeah, from a security a standpoint, it's good there. So yeah, it's not going to escalate any privileges. But great question. Okay, so that's kind of the Fetch XML builder. Another nice one that's personally one of my favorites is the SQL for CDS. And for those, do I have any SQL people in the room? Those that are doing SQL? Awesome. Yeah, I personally love this tool because, again, I come from a developer background, so I have that SQL familiarity. So sometimes it's a lot quicker for me to do sort of ad hoc querying or even CRUD operations using SQL. And the SQL for CDS is a nice tool to actually do that. And it's actually, you'll see that it simulates, if you're familiar with SQL Management Studio, it kind of emulates that experience. And actually, in fact, the developers also provided an extension for SQL Management Studio in the Azure Data Explorer, I think, or whatever the newer one is called. So you could actually install that as a standalone tool to connect to Dataverse, so kind of neat. But for example, I can run your normal sort of select query, so it's kind of the equivalent query I was running on the Fetch XML builder, so doing like a select full name, address, contact from the contact table where the city is equal to Seattle, so I can run that same query and get sort of the same result sets. I can also do things like CRUD operations, so I can do things like, I can update the contact. Maybe I want to change Renee's first name, add a few E's, for example, and I could actually do that. The nice thing with the tool will also put in protections in place to make sure that you want to run certain operations that could be destructive. So for example, I'm updating a number of records, it's telling me, are you sure you want to go ahead and do that? So making sure that, you are doing the right operation, and also it's the expected number of records that you're trying to update. So, I can go ahead and do that. Of course, after prompting or confirming that I want to do that, but that's pretty nice. It also has the ability to query things like metadata, so like querying, what sort of attributes are on your tables or what tables are in your environment. So that's also incredibly useful to quickly find out more about your environment, the metadata, your data model, and so on. A nice thing is too, so you can also take that SQL syntax and you can convert it to Fetch XML, so you can get a generated Fetch XML statement for the query that you're doing. So if I did a query or convert here, you can see it would generate the Fetch XML statement similar to what I had in the Fetch XML builder. So I can take it into that tool or maybe build a custom view around that and work with that. So that's super convenient. It has also a number of little settings that you can set up. So the nice thing is if you want to maybe doing like a large data bulk update after a deployment, and you don't want to trigger off any sort of workflows or plugins as an example, you can do things like bypass some custom plugins so that you're having sort of faster performance when you're doing a kind of ad hoc update. You can do things like setting sort of how many records you want to update in batch, so you can batch in records of 100. You can configure how many sort of background threads you're using, so to get higher throughput if you're again doing a large update, and things like that as well. You can make sure you're setting the the date time, whether it's UTC or your local time. Yes. So this is. So this will still fire on any sort of entity scope business rules, and so actually it will bypass any plugins and some of those validations. So you have to be aware of what you're doing when you're running this. So you have to be very intentional about it. Like again, if you're updating data in bulk, usually you're kind of accounting for any sort of downstream impacts to your other data. So again, you want to be very conscious when you're bypassing that. Usually that's sort of type of operations reserved for like data migrations or bulk data updates. But yeah, it provides the ability to bypass those types of settings. Yes? So the question is, if you've got millions of records, will this still work and scale well? And the answer is it's going to depend on your, again, your query, and also there's going to be any sort of API limits or throttling that applies is going to apply to you here, because again, this is using everything that you're seeing here is going through the Dataverse web API, just like the web clients or any other clients that's connecting to Dataverse. So it's not bypassing or using some sort of hack to go directly to the database. It's actually just again using the APIs and just converting that back to raw requests. So the answer is, I probably wouldn't use this to update millions of records. I'd use a proper data integration tool where it can handle things like batching, multi-threading, and so on and so forth. But Sure, yeah, it can handle things in bulk, but again, your mileage is going to vary. So that's kind of the SQL for CDS, and again, that's a nice little feature. One thing I forgot to sort of mention along the top, you also have sort of these common little operations that you can do. So you can actually go in and open the environment that you're currently connected to. So you can like open up the web browser to your environment if you want to navigate to the environment quickly, get to the maker portal, for example. Same sort of thing with the maker here. Another interesting little feature that can be useful in some scenarios is what's called the impersonate feature. So again, this is a privilege that is available as part of setting security roles in Dataverse. So if you have the ability to impersonate someone, you can basically perform an operation as that user. So this can be actually useful for troubleshooting things like security or access issue, like maybe your users aren't seeing certain records. So you can actually impersonate a user and see for yourself sort of what kind of what they're able to see. So if I, for example, enable the impersonation and I let's look for Michael Scott, I think he's user in there, and he's only got the basic user access. So if I ran the same query to select all of my contacts, let's see, I'm probably not going to get any records back because again, he does not have access to the contact table, or only has access to his own contacts. So in this case, I've gotten 0 records. So yeah, the question around, does this bypass security or allow you to see more than you can? So the answer is no. So again, you'll see exactly whatever the user has access to. And in this case, the same applies for impersonation. And again, a small thing with impersonation that you can't escalate your privileges through impersonation either. So if the person you're impersonating happens to have different privileges than you, you're only going to be able to run the privileges that you have. It's just that you're running it effectively as that user and seeing what they see, if that makes sense. So you're not able to, again, bypass or escalate privileges. And again, that's usually a privilege you would only give to probably administrators or customizers or someone with a privileged role. And so you can see that I'm currently impersonating the user, so that's good. You'll always be kind of aware that you're running as a user, so if you don't want to be impersonating anymore, you can just cancel impersonation and then you're back to being connecting as the current user. So that's the SQL for CDS tool. So let's jump to another tool that I got. Let's take a look at the ERD Visio Builder. This is another one of my favorite tools. Again, this is for documentation. Again, makes life so easy. If you've ever had to like build an ERD or have to maintain an ERD and keep it up to date, this is a nice tool that helps you to basically create a data model and make it exportable to Visio so that you can keep track of your documentation. So, for example, I have all of my tables here on the left side. I have the ability to load all my tables from a particular solution. So let's go into my demo solution. It's got a much more constrained set of tables. So I have things like my contact, account, project team member. So I can kind of load these over in this other panel, and I can choose if I want to include all of my attributes in the data dictionary, or maybe I want to keep it just as high level and just have your tables and the relationships, and maybe I can include, for example, the primary and foreign keys. And so just to get a high level of what my ERD diagram looks like. And I can choose, what sort of levels of relationships I want to include. So if I've got a whole bunch of tables, I could generate all of the relationships to it. Now, of course, I would recommend kind of chunking it into smaller, maybe ERDs or parts of it, because you can have a very, like a spider web of relationships going on. If you got 30 different tables in your environment and you've got all these activities, so you might want to keep it sort of group it by certain maybe related sets of tables to make it easier to manage. But once you're kind of ready for that, you can go in and basically create Visio. So it supports both the old VDX format or the newer VSDX format. So I can go ahead and save that. So call it ERD. And I can actually go in and open that in my Visio. And see, it gets a nice little ERD sort of started for us. I can see all the little connection points using the Crowfoot's database notation. And again, I can kind of start to move it around and kind of reorganize it sort of as I see fit. Looks a little messy here, but the nice thing is at least it generates those connection points and it gives you a starting point. Another thing I sort of like to do when I'm building my ERDs, and with large ERDs, I like to maybe kind of apply color codings to these to kind of identify these sorts of related tables or features or functionality just to make it easier to kind of understand. But again, a super convenient tool for adding documentation for your projects. Yeah, great question. Yeah, great question. So the question is, can you save your settings that you selected? So you want these set of tables that you want to be able to quickly bring up again the next time you need to regenerate after you made some updates. So yes, you have the ability to click this save config, and that'll actually save your configuration. You can give it like a mapping name, or if you have an existing one, you can select that from there. Then you can basically export the settings, so you can export that out, and then import it as well. So import, if you've opened the tool up and you have an existing one, you can open that up, make the little modifications, maybe you add a new table or a few new attributes that you want to include on there. You can definitely load that in, so you don't have to rebuild that configuration again, which can be quite tedious again if you have a large data model. So great question.
If you want to manage field definitions in here, how would you do that?
Sorry, the question is if you want to be able to manage field definitions here. So are you talking about like the actual defining the column settings, like changing its data type and so on?
Data dictionary, so like where did that come from?
So where does the data dictionary come from?
If you wanted to add definitions for specific data points, that was what's from other systems.
So again, this is only going to be able to allow you to connect to anything sourced in Dataverse, so anything that's external outside, unless you're using virtual tables. You'll probably have to add those manually to your data model, because again, this is only getting the information from your Dataverse environment. Good question though. So that's kind of the ERD Visio Builder. Another one I like that's super convenient is the view replicator, or sorry, the view layout replicator. So when you have a lot of views in your environment, and you're starting to add several views in a particular table, one thing you want to make sure, often do as a good practice, is making sure there's consistency across your views. So ensuring things like, you know, the widths are the same, you have the same maybe sets of columns, or core sets of columns on all of them. That can get pretty tedious to do, to go inside of the Maker portal, go into each view designer, making sure that, oh, okay, yeah, how many pixels or how many pixels wide was this one again? I have to go in here and look at this, and oh yeah, but you can instead just kind of load this up in the view layout replicator. So I'm just going to take, for example, my project table. I have, say, a number of views here. So I have my projects at risk, for example. So I have like a project name, project manager, budget. So those are maybe 3 core columns I want to maybe apply all of these base sets of columns against all of my views. So I can go ahead and actually select which views I want to apply this to. So say I have my project at risk, one that is completely inconsistent and not aligned with what things are. So I have like a random width of 133 pixels. I don't have the project name as the first, so I want to align that to, you know, what my other view has. So I can go ahead and select the views that I want to apply it to. So maybe I'm going to apply it to my active, inactive, and project at risk. And then I basically just need to basically apply. So basically it's going to say the selected target views will be updated with the layout and be updated with the sort order of the source view. And then it kind of, you know, prompts you to make sure you want to go ahead and do that, because again, it's going to go and apply those changes. It might take a minute here, then you can go ahead and publish the changes so that you can actually see that reflected inside of the UI, both in your Dataverse environment and of course anywhere else that you're querying that. So if I actually went now back and selected my project at risk, my bad view, I can see now that it's in alignment with my project at risk, my good view. So it's got the project name first, it's got a width of 200 pixels, and so again, huge time saver if you're having to update a whole lot of views and making sure there's a consistency applied. Great question. So the question is, can that apply to personal views as well? I'm trying to remember off the top of my head if that's the case. I believe it does. I don't have any personal views set in this environment in order to show you, but I do believe it does have the ability to, yeah, you do have a setting here at the bottom that says show user views here. So you can choose to filter out just system views or apply that to your user views. So that can be useful as well if you want to sort of, again, apply sort of consistency across your users' views, and they want you to update their views, which is, again, not easily accessible through the UI necessary sometimes. So great question. So that's the view layout replicator. So I want to spend a few minutes also just kind of talking about what sort of other settings and things that you can apply inside of the XRM Toolbox to make it easier to manage. And one of those areas that you'll be working a lot with is basically connections. And so the connection manager is sort of a way to manage and group all of your connections in one sort of place. So I don't know about you guys, but if for example, if you're a consultant working with lots of different maybe clients or customers, you may want to have a different sort of sets of connections that are for this particular client. Or maybe you're in an environment, you have a whole ton of environments, maybe you want to group them, say, by application, or maybe I want to group my development environments in this particular place in production, keep them separate. So you can do that with sort of the connection manager and being able to create what's called a connections file. So the nice thing is I can create sort of a new one off the top. You get one sort of by default when you install the toolbox. I recommend kind of right away just creating a new connection manager. And in many cases, I will also want to back this up. So a good place to put this is in somewhere like your OneDrive or maybe a SharePoint. So that way, if you move to a different laptop, you don't have to recreate all of those connections. So that can be super useful. So for example, I can click here to add an existing connections file, and I can go over to basically my OneDrive, and basically find an existing connection, import that in. In this particular case, it's the same one I already have here, but just for demonstration purposes, I could easily bring that in. And I can go in and modify an existing one as well. So let's, hop over to managing my connections. And to be able to create a new connection, so you get a whole lot of connection methods here out of the box. So a lot of the one you're probably using most is the Microsoft login control. So that's the one Microsoft provides you. So if you're using any sort of their client tools to connect to an environment, whether that's like configuration, migration tool, plugin registration, so on. It's that same login control they provide, so it provides like a kind of a wizard in order for you to connect to your environment. So for example, I would connect to the Office 365 because it's an online tenant. I view my available. I want to view all available organizations in the environment. So I just need to. And the nice thing is the login control does also support MFA. So if you have MFA enabled, that will work. There we go. Bear with me. Enable my MFA. So I can see kind of my list of environments. So maybe I'm going to pick my developer environment I want to add in here. And once you've kind of created that connection, you can give your connection a friendly name here. So I'm just going to call it my personal dev environment. And nice little features that you have as well to kind of identify the type of environment that you're in. You can apply what's called an environment highlight. So for example, if I'm working with like a dev environment, I may want to color code it something like maybe green because that's those are safe to do so. But for example, maybe production, you want to highlight that in red, so kind of as a big warning that you're working off production, you don't accidentally maybe perform some operations you didn't intend to against production. So that's a good way to kind of, I recommend making sure to apply any sort of applying any sort of background color, and you can also apply sort of any text as well. And as you may have seen above here, when I was working with the tool, you can see I have my MPPC 23 demo. So that's the environment I'm connected to, and I've highlighted as green because that's kind of my own developer environment. So again, easy to identify which environment you're connected to, so you're not doing unintended consequences. A nice other kind of recent feature that wasn't added too long ago is they also have the ability to set a browser profile. So there are some tools where you have the ability to maybe click on records and it'll launch it in the web browser to open the environment to look at a record. So for example, you may have saw in SQL for CDS, you saw the unique identifier column of a record, and it was kind of highlighted with a hyperlink. So if I click that, I can go into opening in the web browser. But of course, if you got like multiple different browser profiles, often or not, it's gonna launch in the unintended browser that I intended to, and I'm gonna have to log in, put my credentials, and it's super annoying. But the nice thing is here, you can set a browser profile for this connection. So for example, I can select that I wanna open in Edge, and then I can select which of any browser profiles that I got here, and it'll make sure that any sort of launching or operation will occur opening within that web browser. So I can go ahead and finish. And so I've added that connection in, and you can go in here afterwards and change any of the information. So I can go in and change the highlight information, browser profile, and other properties for that. I can even update the password if, for example, I did, updated your password as part of your domain policies. You can go in and update those connections. You can also show the connection string for this, so this is kind of helpful for a developer if you're kind of building any custom coding and you need that connection string to provide in your code. You can easily get that generated connection string. That's nice and easy. You can also move your connections across to a different existing file. So maybe you started at first. You started with one file and you just started to kind of sprawl. You added about 20 different environments over time. You want to break that up and put into a different connection file. You can easily do that. And as I mentioned, there's also other different authentication methods as well to connect. So I use the login control, but for example, you could use a certificate authentication. So if you have a service principal set up in your Azure AD, if you want to connect via certificate authentication, you can do that. Same thing using a client ID secret. So again, you just have to have the appropriate setup in Azure, but you can prompt that into here, and maybe if you have a team that maybe uses a shared service principal, that could be a good way to use that, so you could effectively share out this kind of common connection file to others, and where you're kind of sharing a maybe service principal connection, again, making it easier for your team to collaborate. So let's kind of talk about some of the settings as well. So there's a number of different settings that you can change as part of the tool. So for example, like in my startup behavior, you can have it so that it doesn't, check for updates, because, maybe you want to ensure that you're staying on a certain version of the tool, because it may break other plugins if maybe a new update came, or maybe other tools haven't been updated yet with any maybe new changes that, based on the toolbox, that could be breaking. One thing I kind of like to do, I personally always have the tool library not show up on open, so I can toggle this to never, so that you only see just your start page in your tools library when you come up. You can toggle if you want to show like your tools first, for example, things like that, make things a little bit easier. Same with the start page, you can kind of configure that a little bit in terms of, if you don't want it to kind of show up tools that have a active connection, maybe, so it's not cluttering up your list. Or you can also choose to hide the start page as well at startup. Configure how many sort of tools you want to see in that list, in case you don't want to see a very cluttered list. You can kind of adjust that as needed. As well, you can kind of configure the icon size. For example, larger icons, I have that larger by default, so I can easily see it. And then change like your ordering, kind of like I did. So I changed mine to show the most used at the top, so I can quickly get to that tool every time I come back into the toolbox. You can expand more sort of metadata, like showing the different categories and whatnot. So a few different little settings you can do to make your toolbox experience customized to your preference. By default, the XRM Toolbox is always going to be kind of installed, or at least the data for it's going to be kind of installed in your sort of local app data directory. So your users, app data roaming, so on. You can change that if you want. Maybe if you want to point it at maybe a OneDrive if you want to make sure all your tools and everything are backed up, you can certainly do that. I haven't done it personally, just because it can be a bit unreliable connected to like a remote OneDrive if your connection drops, right? So I want to be able to maintain that offline. But do have the ability to do that if so. You just need to effectively add in a launch parameter kind of on your shortcut to kind of override the path and specify the new path that you want to launch. From an admin perspective as well, so there's a few sort of things that you can do to lock things down in the environment. One of those is particularly with with the actual tools repository. So by default, this is the default XRM Toolbox library it goes out to. So that gives you access to all of the tools, publicly available and published. But perhaps your administrators, you may only want to restrict your users to a specific set of tools that have been approved and vetted and deemed as secure for your organization's use. So your organization or your admins can go and actually define or set up their own sort of private repository, kind of like a private NuGet feed for the developers and the XRM Toolbox tools for your organization. You want to keep those private and not maybe publish them out to the world. So you can have your own private repository for that you can point to. So that's one way to kind of restrict usage and making sure only the safe and maybe well-known tools that you approve and want your users using. Because again, some of those powerful tools like SQL CDS, you can do some really powerful stuff, but of course, if you're not careful, you can do some destructive stuff. So you might want to limit the use of that to your users. And for, that's a perfectly valid reason, right?
The plugins that are located here, are those in any way certified or vetted by Microsoft?
So the question was, are the plugins in the tool library, are they kind of vetted and validated by Microsoft? So the answer to that will be no, because it is a community built tool, and you'll also see for any sort of Microsoft documentation that may reference a tool, it provides sort of that notice that any support and anything is done by the community, and if you have questions or concerns, you kind of want to contact the publisher.
Are they open in that direction? Code, so it's something that
Yeah, great question. So the question is, can you see the code, the source code for that? And the answer to that is, in most cases, yes. So a lot of the tools in are open source, as I mentioned. You can actually filter that when you're searching inside of the tools library. So if, for example, you see this little GitHub icon, so you can see filter only by tools that are open source, for example. And again, the large majority of them are open source, but there might be, again, a few of them that might be used, again, by an internal team. They maybe not want to make the code available to the world, because maybe they want to protect that IP for whatever reason. That's perfectly fine. But the tools kind of go through some basic certification by the actual XRM Toolbox developer. Again, I don't have full details on exactly that full certification. So if you're kind of concerned about what the tool does, the best thing to do is to actually go in and take a look at the source code for yourself and kind of make that determination on whether you think it's safe. The nice thing is you can, from inside any tool, if you can actually click this help context menu, and you can see there's a help link for the XRM Toolbox itself, and also a help link for the Fetch XML builder. So if the publisher has provided a help page or documentation page, it'll direct you to that page. So for example, for the Fetch XML builder and get help for that, it's going to likely take me over to, in this case it's their website. But in many cases, they'll have things like documentation that they may provide as well for the tool that you can kind of look through. But also you can provide feedback as well, and that will typically take you to their GitHub repository. So in this case, it's going to take me to the GitHub page to actually log like an issue or feedback from there. But from there, you can get to the GitHub repository, look through the source code, and leave any sort of feedback if you want. And I highly encourage you as well to actually leave feedback for any of your tool, any of the tools that you're using. If maybe you have a feature request. Community, I find, is very, very active and always willing to improve the tool. So I definitely encourage you to reach out and get involved. Sorry, you had a hand in the back.
Hey, Chris. Just speaking about the Microsoft documentation that I work on, you commented about that. I would say that if you see a comment in the documentation about, like, say, Fetch XML builder, even though it has a disclaimer underneath, it's really, I think that you ought to be taking a look at that valuable tool like that. So, please, when you see these in docs, we do have a disclaimer, but also we don't put a link to every single tool in the docs.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. So what you're saying is, as I mentioned, a lot of these tools I mentioned earlier, they are shown in Microsoft documentation. So that also in itself kind of is sort of you can kind of be at least a little bit alleviated that yes, Microsoft does kind of, well, not, I guess, unofficially, they endorse soft endorsement of the tool, because again, yeah, as I mentioned, not every tool is listed in there. So for a particular topic, they'll list like tools that are available in the XRM Toolbox to help with managing this sort of features. So that is very true. While it's not officially supported by Microsoft, it is a community tool, but it is kind of an endorsement of the tool. And again, Microsoft, again, yeah, a lot of the tools that have been around for a long time have greatly, significantly helped with making things easier to work with, and it's also kind of allowed Microsoft in many ways to kind of prioritize on maybe other more critical features, because the community has stepped in to fill maybe a gap in the meantime that maybe Microsoft hasn't caught up to, so then they can focus on building other important sort of features or other other bits of things that are available for you. So we're coming up on time. I have just a few minutes left, but there's a couple of other administrative features as well. You can also disable a number of features. So for example, if you want to restrict whether the updates can be applied, or for example, if you want to restrict any sort of anonymous statistics collection. So there is a few little metrics that are kind of captured by the tool just to kind of gauge in terms of the plugins that are installed and usage and things like that, just to get an idea of which tools are being used the most and downloaded. Nothing anything personally identifiable, but you do have the ability to turn off that sort of data collection, and it's basically just a couple of different registry settings, so you can actually turn off things like updates. You can turn off the data collection, and you can also restrict use of the XRM Toolbox completely if you want. So there's just sort of a registry, a single toggle setting that you can basically just set as it's disabled and to true, and then users won't be able to download and run the tool, without your sort of permission. So you can push that out, by through policy or however you will to end user's workstation and lock that down as needed. And same thing as well with some tools. You can also lock down which specific tools that you want to allow and which one you don't. So that's kind of an alternative to using maybe your own private repository. Maybe you don't want to go with the effort of managing a repository, but you maybe just want to restrict a certain set of the plugins that you want to be in here. So that's a good way for admins to kind of manage the use of the XRM Toolbox so that no one's using it for nefarious or dangerous use for those that maybe don't know what they're doing. So as I mentioned, also the nice thing about the Toolbox again is it is a community, or built for the community by the community. And if you want to get involved, I highly recommend, again, even just leaving things like feedback or recommendations for feature improvements. I recommend you going to the publishers, the GitHub pages, leaving that feedback, identifying bugs, or maybe if you want to actually help fix an open bug if you're a developer. Again, pretty much all of the repositories, because they're open source, will allow you to basically take a fork of that and actually make any sort of those improvements or fixes yourself and make a pull request back into the repository and have that your features kind of incorporated into the tool. So that's a nice way to contribute back to the community. Or if you want to build your own plugins, I highly recommend you do that. There's a nice getting started help guidelines on the actual XRM Toolbox website yourself. So it's got a bit of documentation here. I will note that some of the UI is a little bit dated. It just recently went through a UI overhaul, so things like the connection managers that you may have seen has recently been improved. So some of the documentation, you might see sort of the old UI going up to it or shown in the documentation, but there's also a section for developers, so it actually shows you all the things that you need in order to start building your own plugin. So I highly encourage, if you've got maybe a tool or a need that maybe isn't currently being met or have an existing tool, nothing's stopping you from going and creating your own plugin. I highly encourage you. It's a nice way to get involved with the community and share kind of your knowledge and tools that help make your lives easier. That's a great way to contribute to the community. That being said, I'm just going to hop back over to my slides. I've just got a couple of slides left.